Welcome back to the Longevity Lab. I am Dr. Khader, and today we are diving deep into one of the most important pillars of longevity, nutrition. Joining me today, someone who truly lives and breathes the science, Libbie, a registered dietitian and a graduate of Michigan State University. Over the years, Libbie has helped countless people transform their health, from weight loss journeys to optimizing performance and extending health span. I have the privilege of working closely with Libbie here at Naples Longevity Clinic, and I can tell you firsthand, her insights are practical, science-driven, and incredibly effective. So today, we'll break down the latest nutrition strategies that truly move the needle, from building metabolic flexibility to eating for energy, longevity, and vitality. Stay tuned. You won't want to miss this one. Hi, Libbie.
Hey.
Thanks for coming.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here.
Looking forward to this conversation, and I'm sure everybody is.
Yes.
Awesome. So tell us a little bit about your background. How did you end up doing what you're doing today?
Yeah, I've always really had a passion for nutrition, and even going through high school, I'm from Michigan. So in high school, I did a quick visit at the University of Michigan for sports nutrition, and that's really where my passion started, was for sports nutrition and just optimizing, athletic performance. So then I went to Michigan State University. So kind of, if you're from Michigan, University of Michigan and Michigan State, big rivals, but went to Michigan State University and graduated with a Bachelor of Science in Human Nutrition. And I just love the way that food is medicine, and everything that we do and eat is information. It's not necessarily just like calories. Not all calories are the same. So I love to see the benefits of nutrition. After I finished my bachelor's degree, I went on to do an internship. So after that, you have to take a board exam, a national board exam, to become a registered dietitian. So I did that, and then been practicing in clinical nutrition. Able to make recommendations on medical nutrition therapy. So, just always dabbling in my first love of athletic nutrition and wellness and functional nutrition. So this year I did complete a course for naturopathic practitioner. So learning more about just, overall like natural nutrition and other natural remedies to overall health.
Okay, great. That's it comes down to what you love to do, but it also comes down what people teach you and what you learn in school. And it's going to take me a little bit backwards to how there's a point of time in recent history where talking about nutrition was taboo in the medical field. So me being a doctor, I did not learn a single word about nutrition in medical school and residency training. Any conference you go to, if we talk 10% about nutrition, we're lucky. And it always has been a very fluid field where things change. And it's fad diets. You'd have a diet where somebody says ketogenic diet, some other person says Mediterranean, some other person says, well, high carb, low carb, high fat, low fat. So many things going on. But you said something really important, and I would love that everybody who's seeking better nutrition to understand this is not just every calorie, not all calories are equal, but it's not just purely calories in, calories out. So you and I could eat the same exact thing. My body's going to process it different than yours. Exactly. Depends on my needs, depends on your needs, and depends on my hormones, depends on your hormones. What you do this morning, what I do this morning. So I think what people are missing, the big picture out there is, it is the quality more than quantity. So what your body would like to see as quality of food, are you giving the nutrition to your body, the fuel, rather than how much you're eating and what kind of calories you're eating. So, we have this conversation all the time where you see people, frustrated about not losing weight. And then you look at what they eat and what kind of food they're putting in their mouth. and you can see how deficient they are in certain nutrition, certain minerals, certain micronutrients. And when you try to tell them what's going on, what's right, what's wrong, it's very hard to convince people that it's not calories.
Mm-hmm.
So, having said that, what is the thing that you learned in school that you will never apply in real life?
It's funny. I remember in university, in one of my classes, one of the professors told us that like natural sugar, like natural cane sugar, was the same as high fructose corn syrup, and just the same calories like that were there's no difference on how we eat them. And I would never apply that in my practice because high fructose corn syrup actually gets broken down and stored into the liver more than natural sugar, like whether it's honey, maple syrup, or even just natural cane sugar, because of the processing, because of all of the processes that it goes through. So that was one thing I remember learning, and just looking back on that now, just kind of chuckling at that a little bit. Maybe there's more research today showing that, but that is probably one of the things what I would never apply. Also, nutrition is not a one size fits all. So going through college and all of my classes, all of my previous education, I consider all of that when talking to the person, whether it's a mom who's busy with kids running around, or a person who works from home and has, all of the ability to cook meals, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. You have to work with each person. And like you said, also being flexible with how they tolerate certain foods as well, because all the things that you mentioned earlier definitely make a difference in how we process and utilize the nutrition, but also gut health and the different, micronutrient or microbiome that we have helps us, digest and utilize different nutrients. So all of the classes and education that I have, I use, but don't recommend it to everyone. So if that makes sense, like I just really take a personalized approach to each client. And I think that's really important with working with a dietitian versus, talking to, AI or ChatGPT. They're able to say, okay, let's try this one, trial and error. If that didn't work, let's try this next. So we're able to prioritize and go through and check things off after also looking at different like tests, whether it's like a gut health test or, certain labs.
Certain blood work. Yeah. Okay. So, the point here you made, and I'm trying to, put out there is our educational system has failed us and continues to fail us. Like it failed me in medicine, it failed you in nutrition. I cannot discredit the universities and the education, but unfortunately, there are other agenda, right? There are other things that we are overlooking, and talking about medicine and talking about drugs is encouraged, and talking about nutrition is recently encouraged, right? You can see all the YouTube videos and Instagram posts where people talk nutrition. But you have a lot of garbage out there too, right? Somebody who has no idea what they're talking about just because they did a diet and it worked for them. They're going out there and they promote it and they say, well, it works. And, they have these fake credentials.
Yeah.
So it's frustrating from that end too, because we went from lack of information to too much information, where there's a lot of misinformation and a lot of garbage out there that you really don't know what is right and what's wrong. And you put on a very important piece is not everybody is the same. And there's something we tend to forget always, and that is the socioeconomics. Like, what is this person able to eat? How much can they afford? Can they afford this kind of food? Food is not cheap.
Right.
It can be, but a busy family sometimes can depend on fast food to feed everybody quickly because food is not a priority. So we have to also put that in consideration. Social economics are a huge and big important part of what we do and trying to promote and, educate that yes, it is not a priority for you today, but it is cheaper for you to take care of your food now than take care of your health in the future. But we always have to put that in consideration. And you're absolutely right that there's no one size fits all for nutrition.
Mhm.
So there are a few things that I really, hopefully we can squeeze everything in today and talk about all that stuff. So there are certain diets and certain names and certain terms that I want to clarify, and I want to put it out there. People always ask these questions. First one, and it's a very common question. How much protein does a person need?
Yeah, I am and a lot of what, I say today, I do want to preface that you could ask 10 different dietitians and get 10 different answers.
Mhm.
But my personal approach with working with patients is about 30% of their calories coming from protein, depending on what kind of diet they're following. So, how many ever calories you're eating, 30% of your calories should be coming from protein. You can also kind of put that in the line of, 1.2 to 2 grams per kilogram. So you can do the math there. But so, for example, I guess a person that weighs 150 pounds, we could recommend maybe, 100 grams of protein if I'm doing the math right, or more, So, maybe even you could go up to 150 grams of protein, depending on what your macronutrient composition looks like and what your goals are as well, whether that's muscle growth, fat, loss.
So let's say, let's take a few scenarios. So somebody who, they're in their 40s or 50s and they're looking to maintain their muscle mass, maybe try to gain a pound or two of muscle, and at the same time shed off a few pounds. What do you what would you tell them?
Yeah, I would probably recommend a higher protein
Mhm.
and lower carbohydrate diet. Those are really helpful for shedding the excess fat, especially a lot of visceral fat as well. So I would recommend a higher protein, lower carbohydrate diet. And then by default, you would want to increase the amount of fats that you eat as well.
I see.
So with that being said, fats are more calorie dense per volume. So, this person might feel like they're in way larger of a calorie deficit because they aren't getting the volume that they're used to because they're doing, a composition of their diet with more fats. That's probably what I would recommend to them is
Okay.
more protein, lower carb, and then by default, high fat too.
So somebody who's trying to build muscle, we're putting it towards the end of the spectrum, the higher end of the spectrum, which is 2 grams per kilogram, you said?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So how do we respond to somebody who comes and says, for example, well, it is, this is too much protein, or this is going to kill my kidneys, or, I know it's false, but, how do we approach that? How do we convince people that, yes, you do need that much protein. You do need to have 3-4 meals a day with protein in each meal, and you need to have that shake after you work out. Why is it important?
Yeah. So, and that's a common thing that I, encounter. I am running these programs with large groups of people to recommend 75 grams of protein for women and 100 grams of protein for men, just by very minimum. And that's a general recommendation in these programs. And a lot of the people that go through these programs are, especially women, say 75 grams of protein is so hard to get. And I feel like I'm just overeating and gaining weight. Why, why is this the recommendation? Well, most of the time it's because they're not getting the lean sources of protein. So, you could eat a peanut butter and jelly sandwich and it would have 4 grams of protein, but you would need to eat like a ton of peanut butter and jelly sandwiches to be able to hit that protein goal. Whereas if you eat, tuna or chicken breast, you would not have to eat as much, volume or calories to get the protein goal. So, I would recommend that they really make sure they're eating lean sources of protein that don't necessarily have the added calories. Yeah.
Okay. 75 grams, that's on the lower end of the spectrum.
For women,
right? For
yes.
women. Yeah. So that is for, okay. So, in my world, that's not even a lot. I mean,
No, I know.
yeah, I mean, that's 2 meals
It's
basically, right?
shocking. And so
Yeah,
that's,
yeah,
encountered a
yeah.
lot by me. And,
Right, right.
I had a lot of pushback actually when I ran my first program, like,
Mhm.
are you serious? Like, is this a real recommendation? I feel like this is, not doable. So I would, argue that a lot of Americans do not hit their protein goals.
Yeah. I mean, if you want to put 75 as the goal, it's definitely not hard to achieve, but it's very, this is the minimum. Like, this is the bare minimum you have to achieve. And, some meals you can get literally half of that just per meal if you eat right, as you said. Chicken breast or like can of tuna has 25 grams, for
Exactly.
example, right?
Mhm.
Um, okay, so that's one category. So somebody who is, healthy otherwise and trying to build a little muscle. So how about somebody who's older,
Mhm.
60s, 70s, 80s? Um, is the recommendation different? Are we trying to push a little more protein in there? Because we know the term sarcopenia, loss of muscle as we age, and that is a known fact as part of aging. You're going to lose muscle as you grow older. So when it comes to older population, men or women, are we pushing a little bit higher protein recommendations?
Yes, I definitely do. And malnutrition is definitely prevalent in the older population, even here in America. People wouldn't
Mhm.
really recognize that, but um, protein malnutrition is definitely prevalent in the older population.
Mhm.
So I would definitely would recommend higher protein consumption. Also, because as we age, just naturally, we do have reduced absorption in our GI tract just because our GI tract has been through a lot, our whole lives has been, working and whatever kind of damage, any sickness, any, NSAID use, things like that. Our
Mhm.
GI tract just goes through a lot. So by the, we do have a reduction in absorption ability. So that's another reason why we would recommend increased protein,
Mhm.
as well as, I just had something on the tip of my tongue, but I just forgot what I was going to say.
It's okay.
But yeah, so the decrease of absorption definitely would be an increased need for the protein, as well as, like you mentioned, the reduction in muscle mass. And a lot of times when I'm talking to those patients and clients, I tell them, it's not just the muscles in their arms and legs, because, they're like, it's okay. I'm not,
Looking to
young.
buff,
Yeah, I'm not
yeah,
looking to
yeah.
be buff anymore, but,
Mhm.
our heart is a muscle too. We have, our lean skeletal muscle mass that it's just important to maintain.
Mhm.
So definitely I would recommend higher protein
Mhm.
for.
Yeah, yeah. So, correct me if I'm wrong here. Your basal metabolic rate or your calorie needs or energy needs per day are mainly not purely and solely determined by your muscle mass, but it's largely determined by your muscle mass.
Mhm.
So, when we lose weight and we shed all that, like when, we can jump into this later using GLP-1s and losing all the muscle if you're not maintaining your protein intake, get off the GLP-1, you end up losing 10, 15 pounds of muscle mass. Your protein, your energy needs per day have dropped significantly just
Mhm.
by dropping that. So I think the message should be out there that your energy needs are determined by that amount of muscle you have. And it's not just a matter of if you look good or if you have big biceps or triceps or your, legs are big or whatever it is. It's 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 purely longevity.
Exactly.
It is very clear that muscle mass correlates with mental aging, brain aging, heart disease, insulin resistance, and you name it. So to be a little more specific, if you want to choose one diet, one, and you want to try to promote it, I know it's not one size fits all. What is the diet that was studied the most or has a lot of good evidence behind it?
Mhm.
I know it's hard to do randomized control trials on diet because there's a lot of uncontrollables there. But what is one diet you might choose that might be beneficial for anybody who take it? Like you would say, you would never be on. if you are on this diet, you're not going to get hurt. Like, for example, you can say, I can tell you, for example, ketogenic diets, we can recommend it for certain people and they're going to do well on it, but I'm sure there's certain people you're not going to do that.
Mm-hmm.
What is that one diet that you can give as a general advice?
Yeah, definitely. The Mediterranean diet is very well studied, and there's so much evidence to support that it's beneficial for longevity and just overall health for many factors. Just the overall synergy of the entire diet and the nutrition inside of that diet is helpful for brain health, for metabolic health, for all of our nutrient needs, macro and micro. I would definitely recommend the Mediterranean diet. Whole foods approach, of course, is, another easy way to kind of just say, don't eat foods that are packaged. But as far as the Mediterranean diet, it's higher in those healthy, heart healthy fats. So olive oil, salmon, nuts and seeds, walnuts and things like that. So it's definitely a very helpful diet to have, and since it is more of a whole foods approach, you're making sure you're getting all of your micronutrients like vitamins and minerals. Because if we zoom in on a cellular level, our body at like a single moment in time has more than like 37 trillion processes going on, and each one of those processes uses a different micronutrient, whether that's magnesium, folate, things like that. Your B vitamins are so important with metabolic processes. So we really do want to make sure we're getting all those micronutrients. And I can't stress that enough when I'm talking to clients, just to make sure you're making sure you're getting those micronutrients. And it is hard to get your daily recommended dose of all of those, vitamins and minerals. So I always do recommend a multivitamin to people too. So that's another safe recommendation that would be safe recommendation for everyone, most likely. So a multivitamin and Mediterranean diet, you can't really go wrong with those.
Okay. So, but the problem out there is like, I'll give you another example on the ketogenic diet. Well, you can say ketogenic diet, go figure it out. There's going to be a lot of unhealthy fats consumption. There's going to be a lot of metabolic changes, and we'll dive into that in a little bit. So if we leave it up to a person to figure it out, I'm sure they're going to be somewhat confused. So what does a typical meal, a Mediterranean diet meal would look like?
Yeah. So you would have a base of, your vegetables, and they do grains, whether it's, quinoa or other starchy vegetables like winter squash, and other sweet potatoes could be, and also salmon is very popular in the Mediterranean diet, sardines, fatty fish, things like that. So that would be kind of an example of Mediterranean, just very high in fruits and vegetables and, grains and olives, olive oil, things like that.
Okay. All right. Speaking of oils, there's this, I'm not sure if we'll be able to put it to rest today or not, but seed oils. Big thing to talk about. A lot of yes, a lot of no's, and a lot of conspiracy theories, and a lot of people say no, it is really healthy. Some others say no, it's a no, it's going to kill you. And I'm sure the truth is somewhere in the middle, but what is your take on that?
Yeah, it's definitely nuanced, and I'm glad we're talking about this now, because I did just recently come to breakthrough on that. For a while I was very against seed oils and saying, there was a time where I didn't eat any seed oils. I checked all the labels and very against seed oils. But now, I do realize it is a little bit more nuanced than that, because it's more about the ratio between the omega-3 and the omega-6. So seed oils are very high in omega-6 fatty acids, and those are still essential for our diet. But the ratio should be 1:2 or 1:1, that being 1 omega-3 to 2 omega-6. And right now in America, I think the estimated ratio is about 1:20. And that is why there's so much inflammation. And that's why where people are able to say, these seed oils are causing this inflammation. But really, it's not necessarily the seed oils. It's
the amount.
Yes, it's the amount of seed oils, and they're hidden in everything, even trail mix or dried fruit. So things that you would think would be a healthy snack, actually, they have the added omega-6 and seed oils in there. So what I typically recommend to my patients is just increase your omega-3 intake, whether that's from a fish oil supplement or increasing just natural omega-3s from your salmon, sardines, walnuts, chia seeds, flax seeds. So increasing your omega-3 and, limiting and reducing the amount of
omega-6s or seed oils. Yeah. I mean, it's probably a little easier to reduce rather than increase. If you want to bring in the ratio from 1 to 20, to increase the amount of omega-3s, to bring that up to 1 to 1 or 1 to 2, you're going to have to eat a lot of nuts, right?
Yeah.
So, okay. So seed oils are not bad. Seed oils quantity and being in all of our products is bad. Why do you think we're using too much seed oils today, though? What is the reason?
The other thing I was going to mention about seed oils is the majority of the foods that are, packed with the seed oils are just processed junk. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't really recommend, and it's in moderation, I guess, but it's obviously not recommended to eat foods that are highly processed with, a ton of ingredients that you can't even name what they are. So a lot of those processed foods do have the seed oils, because they're packaged, they're convenience food, and they're shelf stable. We live in a convenient world, on the go. We're always eating on the go. So that's why I do believe that, seed oils are overconsumed, because people are eating way too many packaged foods versus the whole foods that is just a one ingredient. And it's okay to eat foods that have more than one ingredient, especially if you're cooking at home. You're obviously going to make a meal with more than one ingredient. But that's the difference between processed food and ultra processed. Ultra processed is, very processed food, where just processed food has, less than 5 ingredients. It's minimally altered and close to natural.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just so processing is everywhere. So cutting the meat is processing.
Yes.
But that is necessary. But very high temperatures to melt something, to make it from one state to another state, that is ultra processing. I always, I'm not a nutritionist or dietitian by any means, but I always, simple advice: if it's in a box, it's probably something you want to avoid.
Yeah.
Right. So, I'm glad we cleared that up a little bit. So seed oils, there's a bad rep for a reason. It's not about the seed oils, it's about what is, number one is the amount, and number two, where is it placed, right? Mm-hmm. Obviously we know that it's cheaper than olive oil, and it's cheaper than a lot of other oils that could be less damaging. So probably that's why it's being used a lot in restaurants and so forth. So that's why there's massive exposure to seed oils in recent years. Another big one, red meats. Mm-hmm. So where did the red meat bad rep came from? Where did it come from? And what is your advice on red meat? And are you comfortable recommending red meat to everybody the same way you do with a Mediterranean diet, or is it also individualized?
So, it obviously would be individualized, but I think it's pretty safe recommendation that the red meat it's just packed with nutrition, like protein, iron, B vitamins. So it is a very nutritious food, and I do recommend that to patients. And so, the bad rep for red meat, there's been studies done showing that red meat is harmful for cardiovascular disease. It increases the risk for cardiovascular disease because of the saturated fat content. In those studies, in my professional and clinical opinion, I think there's flaws in there because, they put a steak, a very unprocessed steak, in the same category as, a hot dog or, deli meats, cured meats. So those studies are a little bit flawed there because, these deli meats, the hot dogs, the cured and processed meats are definitely going to increase risk for cardiovascular disease or other chronic illnesses just because of the processing and other ingredients that they have in there, whatever additives they have. So that's probably what I would say. Red meat is a pretty safe bet. I wouldn't recommend excessive amounts. I know carnivore diet is a
popular one
right now. And, maybe, there's going to be more research coming out, but as far as to my knowledge, I'm not, the biggest fan of it. I don't recommend it. I think there's a lot of room for deficiencies in that diet. But I think it's safe to recommend everyone, that they can have 12 to 18 ounces of red meat a week. So if you're having a 6-ounce steak, you could do that twice a week. So in moderation, it definitely brings some nutrition to the table. And
I see. So we should not be scared of red meat.
I would not be scared.
Okay. So it's interesting how they clumped all these bad meats together, and I'm sure also if you have a cow that's free range versus a cow that is just eating grains, you're also going to have a difference in quality, health effects reflecting on us as well.
100%. And that goes with all animal products, actually. And there is a rise in people knowing about that as well. A lot of people say you can get your pasture raised eggs or grass fed beef. But, the food companies are getting very smart with what they can do. Grass fed beef, they could eat, the cow's last meal could be grass and they can label it as grass fed.
Oh, wow.
So there is a lot, to do with food labels. And, as far as eggs, pasture raised versus free range. Free range means that the chickens are out, for a couple hours a day, where pasture raised means they spend the majority of their lives out there. They almost get 100% of their diet from, the outdoors and whatever. So those eggs are going to be more nutrient dense. The cattle or the cows that eat grass the majority of their life, they are going to be more nutrient dense for us as well.
How do you differentiate on the food label when it comes to the beef?
Yeah, so they do say 100% grass fed. So you would want to look for that label and not just grass fed, grass finished. So the grass finished is, almost the last meal they had the grass. So you would really want to make sure this is 100% grass fed beef.
I see. Okay. So speaking of meat and beef and fat and all, what is your take on ketogenic diets when we're talking specifically about, our field, longevity, when we want to battle insulin resistance? I'm personally a fan of it. I like ketogenic diet. I think it's very hard to sustain it. I don't think it's for everyone. And I think you have to do it right and you have to understand what it is. What is your definition of a ketogenic, not your definition? What is the definition of a ketogenic diet? And do you ever recommend it? And if you do, are there specific conditions or aspects in health and longevity you want to tackle with ketogenic diet?
Yeah, so I totally agree with you that you definitely need to do it right in order for it to have its benefits. And that's one of the reasons why I don't recommend it too often is a lot of people can't sustain it and they are not as educated in how to do it correctly and safely too. And, I was just talking with our other nutritionist in-house the other day. We realized that patients, might eat keto diet for breakfast, keto diet for lunch, and then for dinner, they just, have a ton of carbs. And then they just end up eating more calories because they're doing high fat, and then, carbs anyway. So that is, one of my reasons why I don't recommend it too often. But if somebody's going to work closely with a healthcare professional who's recommending monitoring them, I would say that it is definitely a beneficial diet. There's a lot of research behind it saying that it reduces insulin or increases insulin sensitivity and just overall like metabolic health.
Right.
It helps with cognitive health as well. And that's actually where the ketogenic diet originated, was for children with epilepsy. And it's still recommended today for any children with epilepsy. They are recommended to have a high fat diet for, brain health, and, all of the neurological pathways need that high fat diet would be definitely beneficial. So it is a very high fat diet, probably about 55 to 60% of your calories coming from fat, 30 in a moderate amount of protein. So 30%, like I mentioned, percent of your calories coming from protein, and then very low carbohydrate. So 10% or less. And it really would be, even less than 10%.
Yeah.
But I also was listening to a professor, I can't remember her name, and but she said that, you can almost consider a ketogenic diet anything that has a positive result on insulin levels. So there probably is some nuance out there as well, but in my clinical experience, the ketogenic diet is a high fat diet. So
I see. So I was having a conversation with a cardiologist at some point, and ketogenic diet has a huge bad rep with cardiologists for whatever reason. So, the conversation went as, hey, I think ketogenic diet is good. He was like, absolutely not. Every time I see somebody with a heart attack, one of the things they say is, I just started on a ketogenic diet. And my response was, you only caught this when they had the heart attack, and you're disregarding the first 50 years when that person was eating garbage. And probably, 6 months later, they started feeling there's something odd or something off going on with them. So they wanted to take a diet seriously. So they did a ketogenic diet, which in 6 months is not going to do really much in the grand scheme of things. If you have been eating really bad, not exercising, exposed to all these toxins all your life, you have a 70% or 80% blockage in one of the arteries, and it then happens to rupture at that point. So correlation does not mean causation. I mean, I always try to stress that out, and always looking at the big picture. I do agree, ketogenic diet, if done correctly, I think is very helpful. I've seen big benefits personally in my clients, overall studies, but it's one of these diets, I feel like, and correct me if I'm wrong, you have to do it 100%.
Yeah.
It's, you can do a low carb diet, or you can do a Mediterranean diet, and, you can have a cheat meal here and there. It's not a big deal. But if you do ketogenic diet and you're out of ketosis, that's it. You're resetting again. Actually, in fact, you might hurt yourself. As you said, you can have, some eggs, avocado in the morning, and lunch you have vegetables and tuna, and later at night you have a pizza. So you actually end up hurting yourself. And I would have preferred that you had more carbs during the day at that point. So you're a believer of ketogenic diet, you think it works, but your issue is with applying it and applying it correctly.
Yeah. So the only time I would really recommend it is if somebody works with me closely and I'm able to keep them accountable and also train them on what would be good choices to make sure that they are doing it properly, and, so that I would be able to say, okay, well, we're not really making the best choices here. So maybe we can recommend some different things, like whether it's, just a low carb diet and not necessarily doing the high fat.
I see. Okay. So in order for it to be a ketogenic diet, you have to depend on ketones for energy, correct? So you're saying that low carb diet does not necessarily do the same effect. You're basically just you're getting the benefit from no carbs rather than the high fat, where in ketogenic diet, you're getting the low carb effect, but you're also benefiting, or you're training your body to adapt to fat better and maybe utilize fat as a source of energy.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Definitely.
Okay. Speaking of carbs, I mean, I don't think we can, not live without carbs entirely. I'm sure maybe we can, but especially if you have goals for muscle build and, muscle maintenance, maybe, carbs are worth talking about a little bit. So if somebody is eating carbs and then it's part of their diet, is there a timing for the carb that's more beneficial than another? What would you recommend as far as carbohydrates, as far as type, potatoes, rice, um, but gluten? What clear up that cloud a little bit for us?
Yeah. So, and like you mentioned, somebody who's looking for muscle, like muscle mass and growing their muscle,
Mhm.
carbs are very important, especially those complex carbs, not necessarily your brownies and, whatever. It's those complex carbohydrates. So, your starchy vegetables, whether that's your potatoes, like you mentioned, winter squash, so butternut squash and sweet potatoes. Those are all very necessary for muscle growth. And also, carbs are just our brain's preferred source of energy. So, a lot of times, if we are, if you're not very metabolic flexible to, and you go a long time without eating, you can start feeling brain fog, lack of clarity. You eat something and immediately you feel like better. It's because our brain finally gets glucose to actually function properly. So as far as carbohydrates, I always recommend to stay on the side of the complex carbohydrates, which means fiber. So there are three types of carbohydrates. So there's starches, fiber, and simple carbohydrates, sugars. So obviously the fiber would be the best option. I always kind of break it down simply for clients and patients, short chain, medium chain, and long chain. And, that might not necessarily be 100% scientifically accurate, but it's a really good picture for people to see. So, the fiber is a bigger molecule for our body to gradually break down and digest, so our blood sugar doesn't spike. Starches are the medium chain. So our body breaks them down, a little bit faster than those long chain. So, it doesn't spike the blood sugar like those sugars in the simple carbohydrates. So, always recommending those complex carbohydrates with fiber included. And I also, when talking about eating carbohydrates, I recommend the person to eat the carbohydrate last. There are some studies showing that if you have the exact same meal, chicken, broccoli, and rice, you eat the rice first and then the broccoli and chicken, your blood sugar spike will be much larger than if you ate the chicken first and then the broccoli and then the rice last. So definitely the order of how you eat your carbohydrates during your meals is also a factor in insulin and blood sugar. As far as working out, I always recommend people to eat, a carbohydrate before working out so that they have something to use for their workout rather than their body going to stored, whether stored energy, which is either muscle or fat. And typically our body does break down the muscle before the fat during our strength training or resistance training. So it is important to have some kind of energy source for our body to use during exercise. So a pre-workout snack would be good. There is some recommendations saying, eat protein 30 minutes after a workout. There is some research showing now that it doesn't technically matter that window of opportunity for protein after your workout. You can have, as long as you're hitting your protein goal that day, this research is showing that you're still able to, make your muscle mass.
Reap the benefit of the workout and the
Yes.
resistance training. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's I feel like we get to a point where it is, we have enough evidence to see that resistance training is not a luxury anymore. So it is a necessity.
Mm-hmm.
So, there are some longevity experts out there who would claim that it's not your protein, it's the resistance training. And I mean, I totally disagree with that. I think, they're both important.
Yeah.
I don't think eating protein, enough protein without doing the resistance training or doing resistance training without having enough fuel are gonna, you're not gonna get the benefit that way compared to combining both at the same time. So there's a small period of time where high protein also had a bad rap, and resistance training, made it to the top of the list. Okay, if you do resistance training, you're good to go. But as you've mentioned here, there's a possibility of muscle breakdown, muscle loss, and also you need that energy, prior to going to working out, and you need to, that'll probably push you to do better during your workout. You have more energy to achieve more during the workout,
Mm-hmm.
and eventually reaping more benefits from that. So living a busy life, and families, and kids at school, and um what would you if a mother comes to you and says, hey, give me a fast, quick dinner option that's me, my husband, and two kids can eat from, and everybody will be happy, and our bodies are going to be happy. Cheap, quick, and convenient. What would that be?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of sheet pan dinners. So you kind of
Mm,
just put everything on a baking sheet,
mm,
throw it in the oven, and while it's in the oven, you can do other things. So whether that's, you make up some turkey meatballs or throw some just chicken on the sheet pan, and then you have your starch like the baby potatoes, and then lots of vegetables, whether that's your broccoli, Brussels sprouts, asparagus, or even, the tricolored peppers.
Kids are not going to be happy with that, though.
Yeah, well, maybe the meatballs.
Yeah,
Some picky kids,
yeah,
kids learn from their parents.
sure.
So,
Yeah,
and you can always add sauces. Kids love
mm,
to
to
dip
have a
chicken
little,
into
yeah,
sauces,
yeah,
and some kids like broccoli.
yeah.
Um,
Yeah,
So,
very little. Okay, yeah, I'll take that. Yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah, true, true. I mean, if you season it right, and it looks and smells a lot worse than what it actually tastes like. So,
yeah,
yeah,
those
yeah,
vegetables do smell.
yeah,
Another thing is I always just like to add nutrition to basic meals, whether that's
mm,
spaghetti. Like kids love spaghetti. So
sure.
you can really bulk it up with nutrition.
Mm-hmm.
So using chickpea pasta instead of the, refined,
Gluten, yeah,
white pasta.
mm,
So they're getting their fiber and their protein from the chickpeas. So that's,
mm,
an easy way to add legumes, because another, thing that would be beneficial is to add more legumes. That's a big part of a Mediterranean diet as well. I forgot to mention, but adding lots of beans and legumes to meals in hidden ways
mm,
would be beneficial. I always recommend to busy moms to just set aside time on Sundays to prepare and plan. So I don't necessarily recommend meal prepping, but I recommend ingredient prepping. And what I mean by that is like maybe bake a bunch of chicken. So you have a bunch of chicken on hand, and then you can make different meals throughout the week, whether that's a chicken salad or you make a nourish bowl, with your grain, your vegetables, and your chicken. You can make a simple buffalo chicken wrap, whatever. You can make different things with that chicken throughout the week. You can also prep your grain. So quinoa, I'm a big fan of quinoa. It's actually a seed instead of a grain. It has your complete protein. It's a very nutritious thing to add into your diet. So prepping that ahead of time so that you can just kind of it's already ready. And you can either eat it cold or warm it back up as well. But you can make a quinoa salad out of that as well. Making sure you wash and prepare all of your vegetables is another big thing for convenience. During the week, you're busy. Your kids are at school. They have sports. If your vegetables are washed and prepped and cut, you're more likely to grab them. So,
good tip. One myth that you would like to bust today.
so, and I don't know what your standpoint is on this, but a gluten-free diet is a healthier diet.
That's a myth.
Yes.
Okay.
So that's one myth that I would like to bust.
Okay.
Because there is actually research showing that if you're not sensitive to gluten or allergic with the celiac disease, there isn't necessarily a benefit to avoiding. I know it is often commonly said it's a inflammatory food, but I'm just not a believer that, it is a super high inflammatory food. It might be the pesticides and the whatever processing that's going on. with those foods containing gluten. But that is probably one thing that I would like to bust. I don't know what your thoughts are on that. But one of my best friends has celiac disease, and we talk about that. She's like, if I didn't have celiac disease, there's no way I would avoid gluten if I didn't have to. There's some studies showing that if we do avoid gluten, we could develop an intolerance to gluten as well. So sometimes that is, not something that I recommend is avoiding gluten if you don't have to.
Well, I mean, my take on it is, again, there's no one size fits all. So, first of all, it's very hard to determine if you're sensitive or not. Like if you could be sensitive, but you don't have celiac disease, right? So just going down to the science. The first thing I tell people who come to me with autoimmune diseases and joint pains and aches, unusual rashes, psoriasis, whatever you name it, is avoid gluten. And in a large portion of this retrospective kind of, look at the data, I see that there's improvement. I don't think it's entirely the gluten per se. I think it's the way it was done. I don't think the processing, because, we just talked about ultra processed food. That is a heavily processed food. Like bread is a heavily processed food. And that is just bread. And I also just learned recently from a client of ours, was a baker for a living, had a multi-million-dollar kind of baking business, that the ingredients is not just in the food. There's ingredients and oils and stuff that are toxic that are put on the pans to prevent sticking. And apparently there's this back in the day, a lot of people got sick and they got sensitivity and they got lung disease from, putting all these oils and pans in very high temperatures, obviously smoking and inhaling all that. But also tells me that there's a lot of stuff in our food that it's not technically written in the label. So my take on gluten is, if you can avoid it, great. If you can avoid it, if you're not sensitive, you're right. I mean, there's no big harm from that. But I don't think that it should be a daily thing. I don't think it should come from the majority. The majority of your carb intake coming from that, because the amount of processing that's in there.
And I do agree with you there, but that's just one thing that always kind of gets me is like people want to do gluten-free just because they think it's healthier. But it is, the reason it's said to be just an inflammatory food for everyone is that 80% of the population is actually sensitive. So a lot of times too, like it's not my first recommendation off the bat, but we're so used to so much inflammation, we might not even notice the inflammation that it does cause. So sometimes I do recommend just an elimination diet, like avoid it for a week or 2 weeks, see how you're feeling. Because like you said, a lot of people might not know that they're sensitive, but it doesn't cause inflammation for everyone. So that's just why that's something that I wanted to bring up is it's not necessarily healthier. It 80% of us, may have a gluten sensitivity, which it may cause inflammation. So that's why it's commonly, like you said, you see good results with those autoimmune conditions. Improvement in the inflammation because, a majority of us are, and it might be those additives too in the processing of it. So yeah, it's definitely an interesting topic. Definitely.
Yeah. But it's also not just gluten, right? So when you eat gluten, you're just not eating bread alone, right?
Yeah.
You're usually eating a sandwich that has cold cuts in it or mayonnaise or, condiments.
Or
you're eating a pizza that has, a ton of cheese on it and red sauce that has a ton of sugar. So, I mean, it's always this thing. Always say, oh, if you go to Europe, you eat their gluten, you feel better. I mean, you technically do. You go there, you eat there, you eat very similar stuff to what you eat here, but you feel a little better. I think it has to do with the processing, the preparation. I'm not an expert on how they make bread and dough, but the amount of time that it took you to make it. It also, having industrial amounts versus just making a little bit for your house and letting it sit in the fridge for a couple of days. for the yeast to do the job and all that stuff. So,
Right.
okay, so that's one myth you busted there. So, one thing you want to, the inverse of it, one thing you want to tell want to focus on young people, if they want to walk out of this with one thing that can change today, they'll make long-term impact on their life. What would that be from the nutritional perspective?
It's the added sugars
Okay.
that, over time, it's a lot of disease comes from just our lifestyle, and diet from a lot of added sugars. So I would recommend avoiding as much as possible the added sugars, sticking to those natural sugars. But any kind of added sugars from the processed foods, I really would try to avoid. And they're in a lot of foods like the condiments, like you mentioned, and bread. You wouldn't even recognize some of the foods that have added sugars. So probably I did want to touch on the added sugars there, and it's a big thing. If you start young and you are very conscious about limiting the amount of added sugars that you have in your diet, it's going to make lifelong impact.
Right.
And you're definitely going to see longevity there. Also hydration. A lot of people are lacking on the hydration, unfortunately. So it's another big and simple thing to focus on.
How much water do you need per day?
So it should match your calories, so, you can, or even more depending on your workout, where you're living. Like we live in Florida. We need more water actually than somebody who might live up north. So a basic would be about 2 liters a day. You can go up to 3 liters a day. And if you're working out a ton, going to saunas, that's another factor. So, again, everybody's individual,
Different.
but
no less than 2 liters a day. Yeah. Okay. And one thing, if I may add to, one advice is, you cannot outwork a bad diet.
Yeah.
So if you want to choose between a kitchen and the gym, I'll definitely choose a kitchen. Because I see unfortunately, a lot of professional athletes who come and see us, whether they're, avid runners, cyclists, tennis players, volleyball players, what you name it, that on the professional level, I'm not talking about everyday person. And almost all of them have heart disease. And, that comes down to, I'm sure there's some research about that and why this happens, but I think stress and poor recovery is one, but also I think to a certain extent, there's this false notion that, okay, I worked out very hard. I burned that kind of calories per day. I worked out 3-4 hours today. I tend to eat whatever I want. Just comes back to the very first thing we talked about. It's not just calories. It's not food in, energy out. It is sugars, inflammation, quality, amount of micronutrients that you need to hit, the vitamins. So the picture is a lot bigger than just burning that calorie at the gym and eating it back home or at the restaurant.
I'm so glad you brought that up, because that's one of my favorite things to study is just food as information. There's a whole line of research on nutrigenomics. So if we eat something, it can help us, or harm us. So help us express a gene that has to do with longevity or insulin sensitivity, things like that. Or if we're eating things, it, can cause us to express different genes that can lead to chronic diseases. So looking at food as nutrition instead of only food as fuel is a big thing. It's a lot of my job also is healing relationship with food, because a lot of people don't have the best relationship. They turn to it for comfort. They turn to it for stress, or reward too. So like you mentioned, they had a hard workout. Now I, pretty much deserve this. So instead of looking at food like that, food is medicine. Food is nutrition for our body, and everything that we eat, our body utilizes. So it can either harm us or help us. So
great. I think that's A lot of talking. I think we can talk until tomorrow, and we still have a lot to go over. I'm sure we'll do this again one day. Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah.
And I hope everybody will get something out of this today.
Yeah. Thanks for having me here. I
course.
had a great time and look forward to doing it again.
Yes, absolutely.